Hello, my name is David Ades. I'm a poet based in Sydney and the host of a monthly poetry reading series called Poets Corner, in association with WestWords in Parramatta in Sydney's West. WestWords is Western Sydney's literature development organisation. Poets Corner is part of WestWords' public programming that celebrates the richness, diversity and insight that literature offers. Especially in these times, we thank the ongoing support of Create New South Wales, the Cultural Fund of Copyright Australia, City of Parramatta Council, Blacktown City Council, and Campbelltown City Council, as well as the many project partners that have enabled us to continue to provide opportunities to writers and audiences. We hope that this new world will see a sharing and a closeness of spirit. Each month, I invite a poet to read poems and talk about them for an hour or so around a theme of the poet's choice. Our guest poet today is Steve Evans, who'll read poems and talk on the theme of animals. But first, an acknowledgement of country. I'm recording this from Beecroft in Sydney. Steve is recording from Adelaide in South Australia. I'd like to pay my respects to and acknowledge the elders, past, present and emerging, of the Wallamita people, the traditional custodians of the land in Beecroft, and of the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians of the land in the Adelaide Plains, and to acknowledge also that they are the sovereign owners of their land, which has never been ceded or given up. Steve Evans has written or edited 20 books, including 8 of his poetry. He was a senior management accountant before escaping to become head of the English department at Flinders University, as well as running the creative writing program there. Now retired, he mentors writers and edits their work and teaches creative writing in the community. Of course, he still writes. Several books, poetry and novels are completed or in the pipeline. His work includes general adult fiction, crime fiction, poetry and non-fiction. He's received writing grants and won major prizes, including a Queensland Premier's Prize for Poetry and a Barbara Hanrahan Fellowship, and been shortlisted for many others, such as the John Bray National Poetry Prize, Bridport Poetry Prize, Montreal Poetry Prize, the Newcastle Poetry Prize, and the 2019 Penguin Unpublished Novel Prize, one of 5 entrants among 400 plus that were shortlisted. Steve's most recent titles are Easy Money and Other Stories, which came out in 2019, and the poetry collection Unearthly Pleasures, released in 2021. He has just completed a crime novel based in rural France, and his next poetry collection, Animal Instincts, is due out in 2023. Hi, Steve, and welcome to Poets Corner.
Hello, David.
Well, when you told me of your theme of animals, I expected you to choose poems from your forthcoming collection, Animal Instincts, and was interested to discover that most of the poems that you have selected to read today are not from that collection. So it seems that this subject has been of interest to you for quite some time. Is there something that sparked that interest, or is it something that you've always been interested in?
Firstly, you are right that they're not all, or in the majority, poems from the forthcoming book, and that there is a long-standing interest. I had a country upbringing, which I think influenced that. So I had a lot of exposure to animals. Dad liked fishing a lot, so we spent many weekends on the jetty. We also visited a lot of friends on farms, etc. In my adult life, there were a few years I was on a hobby farm, which was all about, well, atmosphere, of course, but it was about ducks, chooks, marauding foxes, horses, goats, you name it. And I think what I wanted to do with a number of the poems was not simply raise up one of those animals and address it. I have done that, but to do something different in many cases, even if it's just to have a kind of landscape with an animal in it. So I wanted difference between a number of the poems. And that's partly why I looked back at things I'd already done, not just at the ones that are coming.
Well, many poets write poems about domestic animals, but yours is a wider gaze, as you mentioned, that rural upbringing, which is evident in one of the poems that you're going to read today. Some of the poems try to evince animals' interior experiences, which of course is, speculative. It's not something that we can know. Are you?
You don't know that.
Oh,
I might be able to do that. No, I don't.
You're a psychic, animal psychic. I'm just wondering, are you trying in those poems to apprehend what can't be apprehended? Or what is your objective in writing like that?
I think the whole, I won't say mission, but the whole attempt to represent the interior, as you say, that point of view is incredibly rich, as long as we still acknowledge that it's not possible. And it's a mystery it's kind of enchanting to know what the different view of the world would be and how limited it might be and unlimited compared to us in some ways. It's just such a big open book. I really like that.
It takes the poetic eye out of the poem.
Yes. I mean, it's still something we're creating and mediating. It's an invention. But to me, it's a constant reminder that these creatures have their own lives. They're not simply observed. I like that.
And room for the imagination to play.
Of course, yeah. And I don't want to do the same thing over and over and over in poems. Even so, if you play around in that imaginative world, I want to keep finding different ways of doing it. Otherwise, I'll bore myself too.
Wouldn't want that to happen.
No.
So in terms of the animals, do you just observe them, or do you actually research them? What do you do to actually elucidate their characteristics for you before you write the poems?
That's something I've never been asked. I think it's probably mostly observation, probably 75%, but certainly there's some research. If I didn't know something and wanted to know something, like a personal need, I would research. But also if I wanted to inform the poem and not make mistakes, not say something stupid, I would research. If an event happened that I thought wasn't too obscure that I could mention, I'd try to find out more about it to see if it was actually more widespread, that kind of thing. So I think there's grounds for both, but mostly observation.
All right. How about you read one?
Okay. I won't preface it. I'll leave you to ask questions. But I think I said to you at one point when I sent the poems in, of the ones chosen for today, almost all of them are true in the sense of experienced, which is unusual for me. But maybe that's what animal poems are more likely to be in my writing anyway. It's called Flux. 1. I stopped my bike on the summer outskirts of a country childhood, far from shade and houses, the air combustible, the shirt tied at my neck clinging to a film of sweat. Ahead, the snake basks on heat-hazed bitumen, a dark vein flickering on the grey skin of the road. I hurl my fear into urgent parabolas of stone until the snake stirs, slips into a dry paddock, as if the earth tipped, pulled it away. 2. Others through the years, a quick bump under the tyres of the family car or a movement glimpsed in the shadow of the hen house. A few nearly trodden on, then engaged in that curious dance where the snake always leads. And luckless ones, red-eyed and brilliant, sliced into twitching segments, then watched superstitiously till sunset. 3. Now, after so long, a meeting at midnight on my own ground. The refrigerator's pool of light spills across my bare legs, and the floor repeats its whispering. A brown scarf of flesh winds past my feet, a fluid trespass towards the door. In the morning, a turned-out belt of skin at the doorstep. I fold it over my arm. The yellow grass sways beyond the meagre rectangle of lawn.
I was curious why you wanted to start the reading with a poem about snakes.
They were a large part of my experience in the country, and I think it won't surprise you that for a lot of people they are kind of anathema. We got used to them. You were careful, but hardly ever surprised, and they were curious. Not them about me, although they might have been. But I always like to observe their behaviour and think, well, what's going to happen this time? There were all sorts of incidents. I used to take a shortcut across a paddock to a friend's place when I was about 12. And there was there was a mass of big rocks along the way. And twice in summer when I went to jump from one to another, there was a snake lying in the crevice. And I'll tell you what, that makes you go a bit quicker. Running around the side of the house and nearly treading on one. I think I managed to pivot with one hand on my neighbour's fence into their yard better than I could have done on purpose ever. So it just went on and on.
Well, it's interesting that you should say that, because I've had some experiences. I think probably everyone's had experiences with snakes, even if you're not rural. It's not that uncommon. But my experience was a case of my body reacting before my mind. That instinctive, you talk about the hurl of fear, that instinctive reaction, the body's visceral reaction. I was jumping before I knew I was in the air.
Yeah.
To get out of the way. And I wonder if everyone's had that experience. So in a way, this poem will resonate with everyone. But what I noticed going through the procession of the poem is that you started off with this hurl of fear, but by the end, you were much more sanguine about the encounter.
Yeah, I think it's also the difference. You can't avoid it, but in sequence in real life, you've got a child's reaction to a situation, and it's not always guaranteed, but by the time you're an adult, that might have been tempered by what you've learned, what you've seen, and more knowledge. And I think the sense of approach and whose territory it was and all of those things. I mean, you can't save yourself from a poison if you're being sanguine. If you're being fanged, you're being fanged. But I didn't see the urgency at that point. I just thought, okay, well, where are you going? And I happened to have the door open to the outside, and the snake just left. Yeah. So the usual questions arise. You think, well, what happens when I go out there? Will the snake still be there? But I just shut the door.
I mean, in a sense, this poem is more about your response to the snakes than the snakes itself, isn't it?
Yeah. And of course, there were occasions after that with other snakes. And I will mention, it's just occurred to me, there was a poetry reading here recently in which Sue O'Brien read, she lives on country, a poem about her experience recently, and her accessory for the reading was a snake skin that she found outside her house too.
So is this poem just like a series of vignettes of your experiences, or are you wanting through the poem to look at the broader human response to snakes?
Well, I certainly built on what I had experienced. All of those events were mine, but I selected them because I wanted to reflect on reactions. So, the parabolas of stone is maybe a bit of an overwrought image, but I mean, that's what happens when you throw a stone.
It's a good image. I like the image.
Oh, thank you. And that's what I did as a child who'd been told, don't go near snakes. I stood off at a distance because I had to go down that road on my bike. And I thought, well, I can't wait. And luckily the snake agreed, got out of the way.
Okay, so if you'd like to read your next poem, which is set in a unnamed rural Australian town, which could be any rural Australian town in a way.
Yes, it's actually a combination of two. with a bit of playfulness about reality. But as I glance at it now, and of course it's in front of me, well, I haven't memorised it, so it's in front of me. Yes, every element in it is true. The sequence might not be, but there you go. And it's one of the longer ones here. It's called The Burning River. On my last New Year's Eve in the town, after the parties all died down, Cowley's mob stole a petrol drum to set the water alight. And where we had earlier swum, tipping our mouths back wide in that soft confluence of river and summer rain, was a wild rag of blue flame that I watched from the jetty. The burning river, a signal to the stars and those about to leave this place. But now my feet leave no prints on that soft shore. The lights of town squint to a blur, and I sweep from here to anywhere as easy as flicking stations on the Falcon's radio, invisible. I slide past the open shed at the corner mill. The stacked sap-wet ends of new timber are raw 45s with the year's slow music in their rings. Blonde stalagmites of dust lie under the bench where Tom Wright lost a finger to a second's dreaming, and when asked how he did it, absently showed them with another one. At town's edge, cattle like scattered handbags still graze the hillside above Baxter's dump, where heaped papers in constant migration turn through summer air, and accidental sculptures of cast-out wire lie tangled as my old homework excuses. A broken pram on its side is a billy cart in waiting, and the gold and orange of nasturtiums along the road will work their mysteries of light in morning's glare. I pass the paddock's charred circle where we jumped at Guy Fawkes crackers, rattling ladders of red and green, the strings of squibs thrashing underfoot, and where the tang of sour sobs in spring was as bitter as old torch batteries tested on the tongue. Now thistles' cardboard crowns crowd along the fence, and the flat ground has been graded into squares, a dusty map for new houses that are still a long time coming. In Newland Road, in that house with worn shutters, I'm 9 years old, sprawled across a soft-sprung bed, dreaming of the fastest bicycle in the world, half pedalling it already. My mother by the kitchen radio, restitching collars on my father's shirts, and he 2 days away on a sales round through other towns just like this one. At Patterson's place down our street, the dog's dish is an old hubcap, their side gates an iron bedstead. Their chooks in the doorless fridge out the back are tucked into crooning sleep, quieter than the Patterson twins, who snore on the cool of the veranda floor. Mick Jr., chasing sparrows with a pinch of salt, can't even catch them in his dreams. Heather Timms. Heather Timms. What became of Heather Timms? The gossip said she left a note, that she eloped at 17. She fell into the dark. I wondered about weddings and missed her. Her absence hung about us. Her mother left town. Her father would not speak, though I knocked on her door for weeks. The streets I ran are quiet now in night's held breath, but all of yesterday's scraps revolve, the brash colours and faces flashing their instant like summer slideshows in the garden, images floating on a hung white sheet every time I step out, dreaming my old town.
It is such a wonderful portrayal, evocative portrayal of country living in a way. And there's something very nostalgic about it. You're going back, I suppose, to those memories and depicting them now. And the animals in the poem are kind of in the background. They're ubiquitous in a way in rural life, just part and parcel of it. The presence of cattle like scattered handbags and chooks out back, it's taken for granted, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It reminded me the way you see them depicted in 19th century paintings. they look like you only exist in silhouette. It's a bit strange, but when you're around cows close up a lot, you get to appreciate the bony hips and the colours and the textures, and I think they're magnificent.
But in the poem, it's almost like they're there, but they're not really visible.
Yes, I think we take a lot for granted, and I don't mean that they're not there, but we don't appreciate them in the sense that they don't register a lot. It takes stopping and looking.
Yeah. I mean, they're not really of concern to a young kid growing up, are they?
No, they're just there. And I guess writing something like this is a step away from treating your environment as just there. You're actually stopping and looking and trying to record.
Is there you move to the city and you leave behind that rural upbringing? Is there a nostalgia for the animals and that sort of slow, kind of lazy way of life? It's not really lazy, but
I think there is, and I didn't have a typical upbringing in that respect. I started life in the country. Dad had a job which meant he was reposted every so often. It included coming back to the city for, I think, 4 years during my secondary school years. But I finished school in the country, and I continued to go back to places where, for instance, Mum and Dad were raised, which is York Peninsula. And this might seem a little oblique, but I helped set up a motorcycle club, and our significant purpose was for a group of people whose riding we trusted to go for long trips through the country and camp. So we were constantly out on country roads and in national parks and places where there are no houses in sight. So it was that kind of urge to be away from cities and towns that maybe I wouldn't have had otherwise. I don't know.
Would you like to read us another?
Sure. Just to show you it's not all about nostalgia. And by the way, when I said everything in that last poem was true, I was at a farm bonfire dinner dance thing when I was about 12, and the whole business about someone cutting his finger off and then cutting another one off was true.
Whatever happened to him and his hand?
I wish I knew what happened, but he was laughing about it, but I don't think I would have been. While we were on a hobby farm, this happened. You talk about animals that are domesticated or wild, and one of the most domesticated ones, cats and dogs. Or cats would disagree, but probably. Burying the dog. The first I heap aside is sand, the colour of cappuccino froth, then clay's wet wedges, clinging to the spade, and last, the rocks, sparks spitting into my eyes until I finish the hole. I have cut a box of air, a gaping suitcase without a lid. As the light leaves the garden, my son lays his dog down, hands slow to let go, to leave the dulling fur. He takes the spade from me to make a goodbye with stoic sweeps of his arms. When I start to tread the earth, he stares me off. Not yet, that look says. Not yet. And I walk back to the house, leaving him the hardest work.
It's a very tender poem, speaking very gently about the bond between us and our domestic animals. It's really like burying someone from the family, isn't it?
It is, and it won't surprise you that I know several people who talk about their animals as family members. They don't just act like that. I'm not sure how you would measure it if they didn't say it, but they actually say it because they want you to know that that's how the animals are seen. And yeah, I don't have pets at the moment, but I've certainly had a number that figured very prominently in family, and I think had a sense of place in the family. From their side of things, they certainly wanted reactions and looked for certain things from family members. And I think that integrates them in a way too. Yeah, I think a real bond can exist.
The poet Ali Whitelock has some beautiful poems about her dogs, and I've taken to sending her every sort of dog poem I find, and there's so many actually on this subject of the bond between people and their dogs. I mean, no animal really gives you the kind of loyalty and devotion that a dog does. It's, you know, if you want to be loved by an animal, just get a dog, really. And they become an integral part of families. And for children, it can often be their first encounter with loss and grief and death. So here in this poem, you're the parent. It's your loss too, but you're observing your son's loss and, you know, his stare, and you have to attend not only to your grief but to his grief. How hard was it to walk back to the house, leaving him the hardest work?
Oh, bloody hard, really, but necessary. I think, in the nature of our existing connection, and seeing what his wishes were, and that it would make a big difference to him to handle that part himself. And it was another stage of parting, of saying goodbye, that I couldn't do for him. And he'd actually woken me up. He'd made me realise that that was not my job at that point, that it was his. And I had to acknowledge that.
But you had the insight to see it. Not everyone would.
Well, luckily. I don't know, it would have been a very different poem if I'd looked back, and realised in retrospect that what I should have done. Perhaps it could have been written that way. I hadn't thought about that. But it reminds me too, by the way, this is taking some of the somberness out of that moment, of the old joke about the dog and the cat that are involved in an accident and both die. And they appear in front of God, and God says, "Why should I let you come to heaven?" And the dog says, "I will be loyal, faithful, and I will guard you forever." And he goes, "All right, you go onto my right side." And he says to the cat, "What about you?" And the cat says, "You're sitting in my chair."
Yes, they are imperious, the cats.
Yes.
Would you like to read us another poem?
Yes, like I said earlier on, I like finding something different to do in poems. I don't want to repeat myself. So, you know, that could have taken many forms. Nonetheless, I could have been writing sad poetry, or very straightforward poetry, using very plain language all the time, which sometimes I don't. This is a step away again from how you address seeing animals. When I started university, I took typing lessons. I was abysmal, but I was reminded the other day about that, and the phrase which you will pick up in this poem, the quick brown fox. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog and circles it. The quick brown fox slows down and inspects the dog closely. The quick brown fox takes typing lessons while the lazy dog sleeps. The quick brown fox looks for letters left over and thinks. The quick brown fox writes to the newspaper bemoaning the recent state of dogs. The quick brown fox writes its memoirs, signs books at author readings. The lazy dog, no, underdog, writes a counter-narrative. The quick brown fox slows down some more and watches the lazy dog rewriting him. The quick brown fox hires a lawyer.
This change of tone, very playful. Were you inspired at all by Roald Dahl's Fantastic Mr. Fox when you?
No, no. Although now you mention it, I think that was also a movie with George Clooney voicing it too. And yes, that's a lovely story. But no, I was only thinking about the phrase and how a relationship is implied in it that you could contest.
Yeah.
So I wanted to, what's the word they use now? Disrupt that idea. Mm.
So, I mean, it's more than just having fun with the poem. You're trying to do something. You're trying to do that disrupted. But are you also reflecting on the playfulness often apparent in animals?
Yes, I think there is at the very end. There's still play, and it's a little bit more antagonistic. But yeah, definitely. And you see it in surprising circumstances sometimes, not only through spending too much time on Facebook, seeing cavorting animals of different species, but even cats and dogs supposedly very different in their approaches to certain things will play around. Ones that had grown up together, certainly, but even ones that don't know each other might. And yes, I did want this sense of interaction of one observing the other, one reacting. And it's almost like a tennis match that I wanted here.
I haven't really had any personal encounters with foxes, but I get the sense that I have with some other animals like crows, and we'll get onto them in a bit, but that there is calculation at work with the fox. That foxes are adept at problem solving, if you like. Is that part of what you want to portray in this poem?
Yes, that there certainly is an element of calculation and thinking and planning and response, thinking of what might happen next, hoped for or feared. Certainly that. And I've had foxes in my life. I won't say a few times, it sounds like a lot to me, but a couple of times significantly, not least when they decide that the fact that some chooks have stayed out overnight, excuse me, was an invitation. And, some stupid chooks won't come down out of trees in the evenings, and you just have to say, well, good luck. And the foxes say, thank you very much.
I'll bet they do.
Yeah, that's not to say foxes climb trees. I don't think they do, but chooks might get lazy in the morning, and that's a good time.
I read that foxes are cousins to wolves and dogs that diverged from their common ancestor not all that long ago, 10 and 12 million years ago. I was wondering if the poem is alluding to that common ancestry or to the relationship between the two species.
I think there is a kind of familial aspect to it as well, that maybe the difference is, and I think I'm agreeing with you, is not as marked as we might see on the surface, that they recognise something in each other too, yeah.
I think their DNA has they're not compatible anymore, but I think that there was that sort of common background. All right, let's move on. Next poem.
Well,
next series of poems.
Well, they are. It is a group of poems, and would you believe there's actually another series of poems that you won't hear today that are on the same theme?
Yeah, because I've read them. They're in your forthcoming book.
You have. And something happened in the writing of this too, deliberately, which I'll tell you about afterwards. So the Book of Crow. 1. On the first day. On the first day, Crow created Crow in its own image and was satisfied. Crow doesn't have time for gossip. Crow is a machine for solving the problem of too much food. Even the youngest crow has a 1,000-year stare that reads your discomfort precisely. The skull of Crow is small, but it is a library of every animal, all weather, the stark plenty of the world. There is no god of crows, but if there were, Crow would not believe in it. Crow has constellations above, the smallest insect below. What need of gods? 2. A story of Crow. Crow opens to where the story is about Crow. Crow here is beautiful ink signing the sky. Crow makes the rest of the world seem brighter. Crow can recall every mouse it has seen. Crow's dark humour is best kept for crows. Crow is a creature of its own device. Crow cannot be caught by lightning. Crow taught lightning to dance. Crow is blacker than the family Bible. Crow has a high street tailor make its outfits. Crow preaches sermons on the virtues of Crow. Crow prays at the altar of new death. Crow is the blade for the bone that calls to it. Crow knows the eyes of lambs see at last. Crows sit on top of the world. 3. Crow on fire. Outwardly, Crow is still lacquered as if still wet. I beg your pardon. 3. Crow on fire. Outwardly, Crow is lacquered as if still wet, a fine chinoiserie. But Crow has heat beyond its singularity. At first, no light escapes. Crow is its own black hole, swallowing the smallest glimmer of itself back into darkness, into the space of Crow. But it burns. Crow is on fire within, a small, delicate flame the size of a bird's heart in its engine room. You might see it when 2 or 3 together glow in their bleak joy, jointly glistening, the meaning of Crow. 4. Crow's Sunday service. Though he thinks he's a sharp dresser, Crow is tatty today. He clenches his fine claws tighter on the wire. The drops of gone rain are small jewels all about him. Down there on the wet ground is a meagre house with an old woman inside, whose speech has abandoned her. He thinks he sings her voice now, though he keeps this to himself. Crow will tidy his frock coat and drop to her sill, one of all things beautiful and bright, however dark, unkempt, with his orison ready for a few stale crumbs of bread. 5. Crow and shadow. Crow takes its shadow to a spot beside the road. Crow says to shadow, "Here is where our meal will fall." But night comes, with its darkness and indifferent stars. Crow sees that it is all alone. In the morning sunlight, when shadow has returned, it asks, "Where is our promised dinner?" Crow only shakes its head, and then, forgetting grace, eats its shadow at a gulp. There was nothing else to do. Sometimes you take what you can get. 6. Fox and Crow. I have a pelt of unimaginable beauty, says Fox. I am style and fire in motion. Crow does not speak. I am a loner, free of my leash, says Fox. I am the glamour and the glory. Crow does not speak. I see the earth's magnetic field, says Fox. It feeds me, praises me. Crow does not speak. I made the northern lights, says Fox. My tail swept sparks into the sky. Crow does not speak. Fox settles on its paws, twitches its famous ears and waits. Crow does not speak. Crow tilts its head, extends the dark fans of its wings, and flies high above the dwindling red figure without once looking down. 7. No crow. Absences, outlines in the sky where their darkness was. Where 10 of them might gather, each one its own night, now only the lack of crow. What will crow mean in the shadowed stories if we still speak them at all? How will we tell our children the time of crow, its before and after, when crow is gone, in that no crow time?
I'm glad you read those. I really enjoyed those. They show crows having quite the personality and quite the attitude. Crow might not, probably doesn't look on the world like that, but you've taken me to where I can imagine that that is exactly how crow relates to the world. Crow is...
It's also about otherness, isn't it? It's that idea that they're going back to the early conversation we had about our inability to get inside and how we might imagine the lives of animals. That leaves them at our mercy.
But it's so much fun trying, isn't it? Because you've got all the scope in the world, you can do whatever you want. I mean, you have to try and stay true to the characteristics of the animal, but if you whatever you want, really. And
well, we do that about people, real and not, in writing prose.
Yes, because you never really know another person either.
No,
it's all fiction.
No. Yeah. So it would be. I'm thinking of another. It's not so much a joke as a vignette, where a dog is sitting in front of its owner, quote, one day and says in English, "I will never speak to you again."
Woof.
What would you do? Yes, the Crow series, partly because of living in the country a lot, but I certainly see them around here. And I'm in an area, as if it matters, that has a lot of magpies and water birds, because there are wetlands and crows. But I wanted to address crows in many different ways. I didn't want to just seize on one and go, well, that's it, I've done my crow bit. And of course, I worry I've done too many crow poems, but hey, I'm doing as many as I'm happy to do. One thing I avoided doing, but I did pull it off my shelf this morning, was I avoided right from the beginning reading that.
Yes. Yes.
I remember it as a stunning book, but I did not go back to it.
No, that thought had occurred to me. But you could write. I mean, you've obviously thought about crow a lot. Crow's kind of got under your skin, because not just these poems, like you said, the other poems in the other book that are coming out. Is there actually a book of crow? Are you working on them? If you put them all together?
No, I don't think it's my place now. Ted Hughes has done his to have a whole book, but it's silly in a way that I did not think of this beforehand. And if you excuse me dodging out of camera line for one moment. I was at a gallery down at McLaren Vale some while ago, and I already had a painting by someone down there, and I went back because I knew she had this.
There you go.
And there is a little story.
Lift it up a little bit. Just lift it up a little bit because, yeah. Yep.
You can see something red in its mouth, its beak as well. I mean, there's all sorts of myths about crows, but in that case, the artist said that her father was fascinated by crows, And the day he died, they left him, he was in the house, and opened the back door, and there was a crow standing there with something red in its beak, and then it flew away. So she said, look, I don't believe in all of this, but if someone told me that was him leaving, I would have, accepted it. So the least she could do, she said, was to make the painting.
The crow has been portrayed as a harbinger, hasn't it?
Yes, yes, it certainly has. And there's that whole business of white doves versus crows too. Like, the sense of evil, perhaps, about crows. And darkness is something that's imbued in so many stories, so many images that they completely embody. So they have a real artistic value in that sense too. But of course, that means nothing if it doesn't touch us psychologically. So they're ripe for exploiting.
So do you think you're going to write more, or are you done, do you think?
I'm not sure crows have finished with me yet.
There you go. I mean, there's so much to work with because the crow's cocky, imperious, calculating, at ease in the world, opportunistic, haughty. And you capture quite a lot of that in the poems. Was it fun to write them?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I know this is not like study or work where you have a mission, you have a task, and sometimes it can be a bit of a grind. But no, I thoroughly enjoy myself writing these. What I have to be careful about, since I've got, compared to other subjects, so many poems about crow, is not repeating myself. I know I've already touched on this generally about writing poetry, but within that kind of sub area, I've got to satisfy myself I'm doing something different with the next crow poem. Otherwise, there's no point. And I've got a few lying around that I don't think I can justify printing, publishing. But, that's the road to getting to one that you're happy with.
Yeah.
And I still enjoy writing the ones that don't quite work.
How do you know when you're finished with crow?
I'll have to ask them. Or maybe they'll just tell me. Who knows? There's something that occurs to me, you're talking about how some of the poems and the nominal theme is, or more than nominal, is animals. There's a painter, Stephen Hyen, Australian, who does beautiful landscapes, but he comments that what he wants to do almost every time is put a figure in the landscape. And what attracted me to one of his key works, which is a fairly open view with hills in the background, was its title. Well, two things. There was a cow in the corner, very small, and its title, which is something like The Hills, the Cow, and Murder. I thought, okay, I've got to have a close look at this.
Where is the crow?
And there were about 8 crows in the air.
Yeah.
I thought, yep, you've nailed it.
You must have had a lot of fun with the fox and crow poem.
Yes. That was one actually, and I might get it wrong, I hope not, but I actually did do a little bit of research on that because I wanted to know a bit more about foxes' behaviour. Also stories that people have told about foxes over the years, and some of those things that I've suggested about foxes being responsible for some of the stars, the northern lights, came out of that. But also the term leash, I think. We imagine it, I think, mostly perhaps representing some kind of strand that, in the end has a loop around an animal's neck, such as the dog leash. But I think leash is actually also a term for a fox. In some cultures that in the same way that there are collective nouns for some animals, I think leash is about fox or foxes as well. And it was just so surprising. I thought, I'm going to get a double bang out of this one.
Yeah.
I'm going to put it in there. I'll have to go back and look it up again now.
I mean, I can imagine crows and foxes kindred spirits in a way, but crows having none of it.
No. Yes, all this self-aggrandizement on the fox's part.
Crow couldn't care less.
And the crow just goes, yeah, but mate, you can't fly.
Have you written poems about crows and other animals?
Apart from the crow and fox one, no. Oh, one, but well, a bird, another kind of bird, but not another kind of animal.
Because crows often sit on cows or bulls, don't they? And
yeah,
there's a relationship there of some sort.
There's an indirect reference to other animals in the poem I just read, in the sense that the world is seen as a surplus of food because of the carrion aspect there, but that's not about living animals. Oh, untrue. There is also one other reference in there, and that's about pecking the eyes out of newborn lambs. Yeah. So not many, though.
Yeah. All right. Would you like to read another poem?
Sure. I'll just get some of these other ones out of the way. I used to be a reasonable gardener with vegetables, etc., and then have only just come back to it in COVID times. This is called the contagion years, a blessing. In this long quarantine, there is at least one blessing. The small prayer still to be had on my knees in an unkempt garden with dirt under my nails, posing questions with soil and plants about the future and its fruit. While in house arrest, I dig for hope down into the under me, the earth my forebears worked in faith or doubt, those past, those buried, all the unrisen, and wonder where I am. The same sun shines above me. The same sparrows congregate to see the fertile dirt disturbed in this small church beneath my hands, with its chance of bugs and worms, while I think seeds, a coming season, and what I might be then, if I still am at all.
So you mentioned that you sort of come back to gardening during COVID. I think that's not an unusual thing to have happened. I know Jennifer Compton has written poems about her garden in COVID.
Yeah, lovely stuff.
You find yourself gravitating to the work of gardening in these times? Is it something that's got more appeal now?
It does, and it's in an area that actually overlaps in some way also directly with writing, because although I'm in my study now at the back, eastern side of the house, the central living area has a lot of glass on the north, and I look directly out into a courtyard, and that's where I prefer to write. So when I'm sitting there, I'm looking at the garden I've been working on. So I've got to make it aesthetically pleasing. I've got to make it productive. And it's a happy thing to both shape and then to look at afterwards. So, yeah, I certainly do more of it now. I can't say I'm great at it. I've had a lot of plants that, won't have thanked me for putting them where I did. And that's partly because I've got some issues with the amount of sunlight available. But I'm learning again, and I've just put a whole new series of raised beds in. And my partner's a wonderful gardener. In fact, we went to a community garden that she is part of yesterday. And I'm envious of her talent. So I've got to try really hard now, if only so she could tell me what I've done wrong.
There's something about the earth, about dirt under your nails, about being grounded, and also about the continuous presence of small things like bugs and worms and sparrows. That is both blessing and reassurance, I think. So, you know, you talk about this as contagion years a blessing. In these times of contagion and other existential threats, it's natural to seek that reassurance wherever we can, isn't it?
I think it certainly is. I'm drawing in all sorts of things into this today, I know, but I also go for walks much more than I used to. And I deliberately go through large gardens, botanic gardens, national parks, the wetlands here, rather than just suburban streets, so that I can be in those environments, because I think they make you feel good. And that's, you know, obviously about health as well, mental health. It's on a micro scale, and it's also going out into the bigger world, which you have no immediate impact on. You might socially through, you know, affecting policy, but on a daily basis, you can do something in your own yard or balcony, whatever. And even on that scale, yes, you can get dirt under your nails. You can be a wishful thinker. You can go roaming around garden shops, looking at everything that's available there. I had, to go back to dirt, I had a lovely experience putting some agapanthus in for somebody recently. And having dug one of the holes, I had the spade sitting or lying right next to me, like a forearm's distance away or even less. And while I was finishing the hole with my hands, a sparrow came and sat on the blade and just watched. Didn't care about me. Just wanted to know, was there something useful, edible coming up?
I don't know if it's a function of getting older, but I feel like, or if it's a function of COVID and everything else that's going on, but I feel like I'm feeling more blessed. I'm more conscious of my blessings. Is that something that you've experienced?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I have a practice. I'm not religious, which is why I sometimes question the frequency with which God and angels pop up in my poems. But anyway, but I have made it a practice to think of something every day when I wake up that I'm grateful for. Not in a structured way, just to think about it for a moment. And it's not reserved to that time, but I make sure I do it at least then consciously. And yeah, a strong sense of what it is that should not be taken for granted, things that we are blessed by collectively or in our individual lives, and how we can pass on some of the fruits of that to other people as well. And
often it's the little things, isn't it? The bugs and the stuff that's there.
And I think we're also living lives where we can't. It's not possible to be aware of the complete impact that we have in so many different directions, but we can try to be aware of the impact we have in some of those witches. So whether it's insects, like native bees, and which flowers you can plant that are good for them, which also happen to be good for honeybees. But for instance, there are small things we can do for small things as well. Yeah.
You got one more poem for us?
Yes, the house I lived in before, there were some animals that came to it that don't come to this one. And I think it's a different...
which might be a blessing too.
I think it was also about proximity, because the last house was right near a national park. This particular kind of animal pops up all over the place, though. Possum song. She stared red-eyed into my torch when I found her last night. A furred handbag, grey as the branch she clung to. Her disguise let down by the inverted question mark of her tail, a soft hook that hung below. Past midnight, the thud of her landing is a muffled drumming overhead, like a full tank of water knuckle-struck. Then small paws skitter their curved cutlery, scrabbling across roof tiles to an insect delicacy, or away from the neighbour's cat. Now the rain comes, politely, on tiptoe, and I hear 3 quick taps as she lifts rhythmically from the roof into a tree and its overhanging limb, a pocket gymnast looping towards a hollowed warmth somewhere between our bed and the clouded stars. There's no hiss yet, or raucous cries, no marsupial peak hour or rummaging in the ceiling, or piss stains through the plaster. Our possum is still glassy-eyed, curious and cute, a novelty that will not last. And if you know what possums sound like, they can be bloody annoying.
Well, most Australians would have had some experience with possums, I would think. I like the visual descriptions of the possum, furred handbag, pocket gymnast, but what I really like in this poem are the soundscapes that you evoke, the thud, the muffled drumming, the skitter, the scrabbling, the 3 quick taps. It makes it a very present poem, very vivid poem. So the novelty did not last?
I think it's a mixed thing. You have to admire them for various reasons.
But you didn't end up with it in your roof or any of that stuff?
Oh, yes.
You did?
Yes, and several times, and went around trying to find out which gap to block next and how.
You didn't have one die in the roof and the smell and all that sort of horrible stuff?
I had one die in the wall, and that was a double brick. Fortunately, it was a garage wall, so though we couldn't do anything much about it, we just had to kind of reodorize the garage. And we had 2 fascinating experiences, or fascinating to me. It was a big house on 4 levels that went up a hill, and we had 2 combustion heaters, each with a flue and a rain cap. And twice, the one at the ground level, as I came down the steps to go out the front door, I realised when I heard something, I glanced at the glass door in the front of the heater, and there, covered in ash, looking plaintively out at me, was a possum. It had knocked the cap off and dropped down through the flue and landed, presumably with a puff of ashes, and then spent a few hours waiting to be seen. So then it was a case of get a towel, open the door at lightning speed and drop the towel around it and take it outside, let it go. And then get a ladder and climb up to the roof and fix the tin cap back on. So yeah, we had them, but mostly the sound of them. Yeah.
But that's an interesting story. I mean, do you think we forget sometimes when we see animals like this that are cute, that it's still wild and feral?
Yeah, and I've also had possums that sit on side fences, and you look at them, and there's a temptation, although it's human intervention, temptation to interact and to pat them and all that.
You get scratched.
Then you look at possums' claws. It might be in many cases, there's no claws, but with possums there is definitely claws. So yes, there is a real little contrast there.
Do you think we have an ambivalent relationship with possums and I guess with other animals, that they're fine so long as they stay in their place and don't encroach on ours?
Yeah, there's a lot of that, I think. And on the smallest level, things like mice. But if you go down much further, yeah, we don't like living with ants inside the
Spiders.
borders of our territory, or white ants, or flies.
Mosquitoes, spiders.
Mosquitoes, yes. I've got a poem about mosquitoes. It's not hard to find animal subjects.
No.
It's doing something satisfying with that as a work, as a written work. Otherwise, why bother?
Well, thank you, Steve, very much for sharing poems and insights on the theme of animals. I've enjoyed this. Details of Steve's publications will be posted with this podcast, so look out for that. We'll return in July with Ray White on the theme of unruly poems, ones that defy convention through structure, language, and themes. See you then.
Thank you, David.